And I'll first ask Mr. Ashok Lavasa to say, and this is something that I've been meaning to ask you from, especially after you wrote the paper, and I'm quoting you, that Mr. Haldea was acutely conscious that the complex legal, financial, and technical issues of PPP needed a thoroughness that government officials generally neither have the time nor the capacity to fully grasp, and which have the potential of landing them in trouble. So, and as a person with his matchless negotiating skill, he managed to stay out of the trouble, or he invited more trouble. What was it that made Mr. Haldea unique? You were there in a pole position with him in most of those complex negotiations. What exactly was happening?
Thank you, Shubhamay. First of all, I must say that I had a very enriching relationship with Mr. Haldea for 25 years. And today I feel a sense of fulfillment in being associated with this project and this program. Now, I think the hallmark of Mr. Haldea, if I can put it in one word, was transparency. He believed that the public-private partnership process, which I think he was a pundit of, many people refer to him as the father of public-private partnership, because the public-private partnership essentially is a relationship which is collaborative between the sovereign and the non-sovereign. And it is a commercial relationship. So on a sustained basis, government is entering into a relationship with the private sector which has commercial dimensions. And it is in order for this collaborative and relationship to be transparent that Mr. Haldea always insisted that whatever you do should be transparent, number one. Number two is that the public-private partnership has to be governed by laws, it has to be governed by regulations, it has to be governed by policies. And all of them need to be translated into a contractual, legally binding relationship, which also needs to be transparent in order to avoid loading of excessive risk on the private sector, as well as loading excessive risk on the government. So you avoid rent seeking as far as the government side is concerned, and on the private sector, you avoid excessive assumption of risk. The third thing, which I think distinguished Mr. Haldea, was that he ensured that transparency is required in order to have a consultative process. The decision-making process needs to be consultative, and the more transparent you are, the more you can ensure that people participate by giving their inputs. And the fourth reason why I feel he contributed a lot towards this is that he felt that transparency can lead to a competitive process. And the competitive process can be fair only if it is transparent. And it gives the best value for the money which government invests. It gives the possibility of the best service which the consumers can expect. So I think on account of all these reasons and his insistence on transparency, if I were to put it in Hindi, I would say that he had tark for everything. He had tariqa on how to do it, and he had enormous amount of patience, tasalli, on how to go about this public-private partnership. So I think that is what actually distinguished him.
Putting a very, very clean and neat explanation of what made Mr. Gajendra Haldea not that favorite with the powers that be, and I'll come to that later on. But let me ask at this point, Professor Morris, you have used the word, and I'm quoting you from your article, that instead of the Rambo type of civil servants, what we need are civil servants who have show the diligence, the ability to work seriously through the complex negotiations. And, and particularly in public service delivery, in dealing with the private sector, areas where the Indian state has been known for its weakness, it is necessary to not allow the finessing by the private sector to come through. Now, that is something which is a very interesting point that you make, because as you said, the finessing that the private sector could do if the approach for the engagement was not carefully crafted. What exactly was this that you were explaining? And I mean, like from your analysis, and because you've been a keen watcher of the sector, so where exactly do you think Gajendra Haldea made the difference?
The first thing in response to your question would be that what he did, resulted in durable change. And I think that is very important. We have had any number of civil servants who kind of reached out, and I've used the term Rambo, did a lot of good, no doubt. But, when they left their seat, things kind of slowly, sometimes rather quickly, collapsed on itself, and things went back to being what they were. That is, to deny public value and social value in the decisions and the actions of government. Okay? See, the other thing which I think is very important and which comes through, which has perhaps not been articulated well enough, is that, he had a kind of a mantra for getting government to do the right thing. Now, how does this happen? We often complain of lack of coordination between various government departments. We say that, look, if you some are so naive as to even say that just slap the departments together and you'll have coordination. It doesn't happen that way, because the Indian civil service, the Indian bureaucracy is hardwired for turf protection and discussions on turf matters. So typically, even in coordination meetings that I've attended, civil servants will often say, "Hey, this violates my turf." Okay, and that's how the discussion goes on. But what Gajendra brings is really that, look, is public value being served? Is social value being served? Let us use that as a lever and then worry about how we can coordinate. And then the coordination will actually happen. Okay. Yeah, he had a very good sense, and I would emphasize this, which you brought out, of the ability of the private sector to exploit, niches, loopholes, and little difficulties in contracts, a loose end here or there. And we have seen that happen in so many cases. And, among the case studies that we have done at IIM Ahmedabad, these come out very surely. So he had a very good sense, and therefore he was a master of detail. Okay. The other thing which he brings out is that, look, in an era where the private sector is going to do good things, it would be used to serve public value, to provide social services. Government itself has to be accountable under its own laws. So there are many acts like the Electricity Act 2003, which Gajendra Haldea designed, but which did not have the kind of impact that it could have had. I think there is still potential. And the reason is that government ended up violating its own acts. And they gave the excuse that we are doing it for the good. But the act was intended to work in a certain way, which it was not allowed to. And today we see this even more rife. In the name of good, governments violate their own acts, and that is their own laws. And that's not something which can give confidence to people at large.
I have not worked with Gajendra, but I have known him for 49 years and 8 months. So I have seen him very closely as a colleague and as an exceptional friend. And so let me start with a couplet that I think would honor his memory and he would appreciate. हमारे बाद इस महफिल में अफसाने बयां होंगे, बहारें हमको ढूंढेंगी, न जाने हम कहाँ होंगे. Poetry was very close to his heart, and it makes me very emotional actually when I speak of him or I think of him, because there are moments in my experience which are hilarious, which are intense, and which are tragic. We arrived in Mussoorie in July of 1973. We had met, I think, in earlier part of 1973 in Rao's study circle to be coached for the IAS, and all of us who are here, Singh Saab bhi yahan hain. I think, sir, you also may have been to Rao. You didn't? But a lot of us were always going through the Rao's IAS study circle. And we became friends there. So when we arrived in Mussoorie, we were already friends, and we had no idea about his special qualities. And the first thing that came was a couple of months later at a social function, an evening in Mussoorie. And we had a very difficult deputy director called Mr. Kapila. Vinod, you will remember him perhaps. So nobody was, we all wanted Kapila Saab to at least attend the function. But nobody was confident enough how he would take it, whether he would come or not. So Gajendra said, "Fikar mat kijega, Kapila Saab aayenge." We were surprised, but anyway, in the evening, I was the compere of the show, and so as the show was in progress, in 15, 20 minutes, Gajendra walked in with Mr. Kapila, and then gave me a piece of paper. It said, "Kapila gaenge." So I was completely astonished, and I kept the paper aside, and I continued with the program and kept looking at Gajendra, and he said, so I said, finally, well, I said, I am told that Kapila Saab will participate, and actually Kapila did participate with a harmonium and sang not one but two ghazals. So that was an expression of his persuasion, of how he could persuade people. A couple of months later, we had Manoj Kumar visiting Mussoorie. And in the afternoon, he said that, let's go and meet him. I said, "Tum kya bolte ho yaar? He's a big star. He had made Pura Bar Paschim and Upkar and all that. He won't see us." Next day, I got a call from Cecil Hotel, a Savoy Hotel, saying that, please come to the hotel straight away, and at the reception, ask for Manoj Kumar's suite. So I landed up there, and there I see Manoj Kumar and Gajendra playing table tennis. So the magic of the man was enormous, and I am full of these stories. But the last instance, of course, we also fought battles together. Mr. Bedi has left, is when in the Delhi Golf Club they were removing staff from during COVID times, and Gajendra and I had got together and resisted that and said, we won't let this happen, but we lost that battle.
With so many people looking up to him, why was he going solo? Why was it difficulty of being Gajendra Haldea?
Well, first of all, I'll pick up the thread from what Ashok Lavasa said. He said he had three attributes, three T's in Hindi, tark, tarika, or tasalli. But there's a fourth T that he did not have. That is tact, right? So I interacted with him purely as a journalist. So I'm not somebody who's particularly known to be having tact, nor much tark, tarika, and definitely not tasalli. But between him and I, we had one thing in common that we discovered later. Both of us were deeply committed and very strongly emotionally committed to the idea of building infrastructure in India. That India had served itself very poorly by not building any infrastructure. So we began with arguments. And anything I say or I believe is in public domain, because journalists are never off the record. People can be off the record with journalists, and those confidences are kept. But journalists and their views are never off the record. So my views are printed, and I think I did use some harsh words in criticism of him, saying that a lot of infrastructure can be built, but he's in his search for the perfect world, everything gets delayed. So perfect world, I think I might have said at some point, वो उससे हम बनाना रिपब्लिक बन गए हैं, क्योंकि हम बोलते हैं ये बनाना है, ये बनाना है, ये बनाना है, लेकिन कुछ बनता नहीं है. And this argument came to a head over the airport concessions, Delhi and Mumbai airport concessions, at a time when Dr. Manmohan Singh was then using the Commonwealth Games to get this going, because in UPA 1 there was a lot of opposition to airport privatization from the left, etc., left and the Congress. So he was trying to fight that political opposition, and then this new one came that these contracts are not good enough, you need fresh contracts. And our view editorially was that once you start that, It'll take time, by which time the opposition to the government will become too much and these airports will never get privatized. So our intellectual argument was that good is not the enemy of the best. Best is not the enemy of the good. So one day he called me. I didn't know him. He called me, or maybe Montek told me that he wants to see you. And he came to me, came to my office with great humility, with his contracts and agreements, and saying, "ये देखो, इसमें सब हेरा फेरियाँ हो सकती हैं, ये हो सकता है, वो हो सकता है, अब समझते नहीं हो." मैंने कहा, "सर, आप परफेक्ट वर्ल्ड बना रहे हैं, ये होगा नहीं, कुछ भी नहीं होगा, इस देश में यही होता रहा है." But so the airports happened as they happened. But the fact is that I began to see sense in what he was saying. He also began to see some sense in what I was saying. And he came, when he produced those big model concession agreements, he personally came to give them to me. And I said, "Sir, लगता है तो आपने सब वो lawyers के लिए लिखे हैं." तो he said, "नहीं, इसके बाद officers को डर नहीं लगेगा." Because a lot of things don't happen in the government because officers are afraid that they will do it and 5 years later the CBI will come when they will have to pay their own legal bills. So he said, once this is done, people will be protected. And I can now see the value of that. I can now see the value of that. Just the fear of scams is much less. A lot of infrastructure is getting built. So I see that just as Nandan Nilekani and others have built what is India Stack now, he built, and this is India Stack for delivery of government services and banking and finance, he built an India Stack for physical infrastructure and also power, and this can now be applied in many other areas. So for me, truly one of the great sons of India, without whom this great infrastructure revolution would not have taken place. And I feel privileged both for the fact that I sparred with him and also to have had his friendship, and we had a relationship of great mutual respect, in spite of the fact that we started, at least I started, being a critic.
Shekhar, you've nicely gone around with your, the tact, going past the question of why it was so difficult being Gajendra Haldea.
I can tell you in 1 minute, because in the government, actually in all institutions, but government is the biggest institution, there is groupthink, right? So in the groupthink, if you have a unique point of view, then it will be very difficult to be who you are.
That's right. Mr. Lavasa, on this.
Yeah, I think what Shekhar said, that he didn't have tact, but I think he had two other T's. One was his truthfulness and tenacity. And I think in his tenacity, he had tact. I can tell you that he had a solution for all kinds of problems which he would anticipate. He would keep them in his pocket to bring it out at the right time. That's what my experience has been. He would never leave a room where he thinks that he cannot win the argument. He will keep persisting, giving you options one after the other. The only thing is that his eyes were very clearly on the goalpost that he had. And that is why I think that Mr. N.K. Singh said that he had contradictory attributes. And I feel that he had the ability, and Shekhar will pardon me for using the cricketing analogy, he could bat at both ends. He could work to protect the private sector from the government. He could work to protect the government from the exploitative tendencies of the private sector. But what he always had in mind, I think that was his strength. He always kept his eye on the public interest.
Well, that's something, and there's a particular incident that Mr. K. M. Chandrasekhar recounts about the Kochi Metro, about the Kochi Kochi Metro, where he didn't get a serve, where, not heeding Mr. Haldia's request led to trouble, whereas the international transshipment port at Vizhinjam was actually a success, despite all the attributes to the country. In fact, there are two articles there by Mr. Suresh Babu and Chandrasekhar, which both talk about it. And it says that once Haldea involved himself in the project, the process began to move forward briskly. So, Mr. Morris, if a civil servant, if you were to be telling a civil servant today to develop, to work on the agenda projects that Dr. N.K. Singh is talking about on infrastructure and others, would you ask them to follow the Gajendra Haldea model?
Undoubtedly, and not just his model concession agreements and all of that, because we need to certainly have many more model concession agreements than what Mr. Haldia was able to put together. But the principles, the kind of principles which underlie, let us say, public-private partnership, I don't think they are widely appreciated even today. The first thing which Gajendra always understood, and that's where many of his battles with us academics was that each sector has characteristics of its own, and that is something which needs to get into the nature of the PPP. The second thing I think where Gajendra's position and so on becomes very important is actually to work on institutions, to work on the law, to work on the framework, rather than running after individuals. I'm reminded of this corruption story which was written by Srinivas in one of the chapters. I mean, there's a lot of corruption we know which happens. The usual, sing-song kind of rationalization for that is, look, the politician is corrupt, the system is corrupt, therefore what can the civil service do? I would invert it. I would say that, look, corruption is often the result of bad policy, of the result of bad contracts, bad procurement. So there is enormous scope to change those, and corruption will take a natural process downwards. And that's what Gajendra realized. So he never went after individuals. He tried to change the system by which the scope for corruption was very limited. And therefore, I would think it's a very important point. I have other points, but I'll come to it later. Okay.
Yeah, we are running short of time. And Shekhar, I just wanted to ask, is it possible to develop, to push this sort of an agenda without the political support? You just alluded to it, but where was the political, what was the relationship between the bureaucracy and the politics that needs to be or wasn't there, or if it's there today? What are the issues that you think needs to be flagged?
So you can do nothing without political support. You can fight the political system and go down fighting and be a martyr, but you cannot achieve anything without political support. And for that, you have to understand what the politicians want. So the first thing politicians want is to win elections. The second thing they want is to maintain a steady supply of money for themselves and their politics. And the third thing they want is no controversies, because they don't want to face the wrath of the Prevention of Corruption Act or bad press and things like that. So for a civil servant who's in her quest for the perfect world, you have to keep this at the back of your mind. So I've seen politicians of various kinds. I've seen Mr. Chautala, who would say, गुप्ता साहब, हम यहाँ कोई धर्म कर्म करने थोड़ा आ रहे हैं, ये कोई तीर्थ यात्रा थोड़ा है, हम तो यहाँ सत्ता के लिए आए हैं. देखिए 10 साल जेल में बैठे ना. He might have had his measure with him in the jail, but he spent 10 years in jail. So now you can also incentivize the politician by saying that, look, leave it to me to create the perfect world. You will get infrastructure. It can win you votes. It can get you elected, because look at politicians across the country now. They are all, infrastructure is their first proposition to the voter, because infrastructure is visible. And the second thing is, I'll keep you away from controversies because I have these documents, and I'm taking out all discretion and exceptions from the system, which leads to corruption. So I think you can do these things. It takes time.
Well, I suppose we can do nothing better than ask Mr. Jung to tell us one more incident to wrap up this particular evening and to leave us with the memory of a towering personality. So over to you, sir, and then way over. Thank you.
Again, I think बहुत तारीफें भी हुई. And it's not that Gajendra didn't make mistakes. It's also, and I'm saying this because he had his last encounter was his association with the Kejriwal government. And at that point of time, I think that he was backing a wrong cause. And so he would come to me and we would argue. I won't relate the matter, but I think that he was incorrect, and we agreed to disagree. And Gajendra, as I said, when he was parting, I said, "Ke partner, tum Rottweiler ho, but always the Rottweiler doesn't get the bone." So, but we stayed in touch. The hallmark of the man's personality, and I must share with you, is that I was in touch with him till the last 2 weeks that he passed away, maybe 3 weeks. And not at one time did he mention that he was unwell. So we were fighting a battle, like I said, with the Delhi golf course, that they should not dismiss subordinate staff during COVID. And all we were saying is keep them for 6 months more. COVID would go away. And Gajendra and I were in regular touch on phone and on email, but he just wouldn't let go. And at that point of time, in fact, I asked him कि तुम अब सरकारी घर में हो, तुम रहोगे कहाँ retirement के बाद जब छोड़ोगे? And all he said was that दोस्त जब कल का भरोसा नहीं तो मैं घर की क्या तैयारी करूं? So perhaps that was the hint that time is limited. So my admiration for the man is absolutely unending. I think that we have many good people in the civil service, but like I said, that a man with such courage of conviction, such integrity, and the ability to stand and withstand pressure with politeness is absolutely exceptional. I don't think that, I've said this in my book, as Mark Antony would say, that here was Gajendra, whence comes such another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was